Welcome back to Hacker Hangouts on Saturday morning. And you think that we have these things planned, but we got to the end of the week and we're like, oh, great, what topics do we have?
Consummate professionals. Consummate
Professionals. And we got to the end and I'm like, I haven't been able to do a thumbnail. I haven't been able to do topics. But he's like, well, how about we just chat and hack? And I'm like, that sounds fantastic. So we tossed together a thumbnail. It's up. You saw it. It's magical for what it is. It's AI generated with just our faces planted over it. But Gowrie is you do kernel hacking, and you're going to do kernel hacking, which is nuts to me because this is so outside my realm of expertise, and this feels like the deep magic, as we've called it, of what is possible.
You know what's funny though? Well, first of all, kernel hacking in the traditional sense, like I'm doing software development on the kernel, and like once you spend just a little time developing and sitting on the mailing list, you realize it's like any other piece of software, except it's 30 years old now. I guess not 30, like 20 something years old.
Barely maintained with 1,000 developers, with 2 of them which are actually doing the work. Does that most?
Yeah. So I went to the Linux Plumbers conference a few weeks ago, and there was a whole session on maintainer burnout. And maintainer is basically a subsystem lead, right? So like somebody owns a particular file, for example, or a particular subset of files. And there was they had a special session on maintainer burnout and what you could do to prevent it. So yeah, barely maintained, one guy responsible or girl responsible for an entire subsystem. And yeah, it's interesting for sure.
There's a couple other topics I have for today too that I'm curious what your opinion is. So while we're going to be doing kernel hacking, there's just a slew of both like articles and news that came out. Amazon had a bunch of services that were released, and a couple of which are just kind of terrifying. And then also a victory for open source because one of them, like their stable diffusion alternative, is like not as good as just stable diffusion, which is kind of amazing to me. There's like encryption internally at AWS, which was just like interesting discussion topic for me. And then like, let's make a subscription for everything to unlock heated seats and things like that, which is just a whole nother thing to discuss. With that though, oh yeah, and then Braden, here we go. Early predictions for DEF CON 32. Let's talk to DEF CON 32. Outside of like predictions of like what my plans are, there's a whole video which is probably needs to be dedicated to video at DEF CON and how it's changed and what I would like and what I haven't. Here we go. Gowrie, I was looking back and I was actually going to do a video along the lines of like what 3 million hackers have taught me. Looking back at 10 years of DEF CON, 10 times 30, that'd be like 300,000 hackers. Oh, my math is hard. And looking back, and I realized there's a lesson to be learned from like every year I've gone to DEF CON, like starting with like earlier ones of you have like you realize how you go there and there's imposter syndrome and all of that, but like you realize there's really, really smart people at DEF CON, all of which are in their verticals are incredibly smart. And just surrounding yourself with other smart people makes you smarter in some ways. But you surround yourself with happy people, you start finding yourself becoming happier. You surround yourself with like depressive people. We're talking about like bathing in the blood of like the awful news network. Yeah, oftentimes that puts you in a downward spiral. And I think like the first year of DEF CON taught me is your friends make very big difference, and the people you surround yourself with make a very, very big difference in your life. And every year taught me something new, just like the past few years of video at DEF CON, I feel like has taught me something new. It's taught me not only how to be comfortable in front of a camera, but like what I find fascinating at DEF CON is very ethereal, and it's hard to capture on DEF CON, like hard to capture on video. And I think we're with your help and us together, I feel like we're starting to get the hang of like how to capture those things.
Yeah, it's we've gone through the iteration like 3 times. The first year we didn't really do a whole lot of video, but the past 2 years, getting the feeling of what people are comfortable with, and then also getting the feeling of how we talk about trying to capture the essence of DEF CON while we're there, which is very hard because once you shove a camera in people's faces, they clam up, and it's not, it's not DEF CON. It becomes a performance, right? And that's kind of funny because that's sort of what DEF CON has become, as a giant circus. And so I think we did a decent job at capturing that the past or the first year. And then the second year we were like, that's not really the DEF CON we want to capture. We actually want to capture, the nonsense of it all. Not the nonsense of it all. The je ne sais quoi of DEF CON, if you will. It's one of those things where, like, I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for, but you and I both know when we find it. What is it? Queen Meanie at
QM.
At QM. Yeah, like Queen Meanie at QM, and then getting the story about it, and then breaking into some of the older stories of DEF CON. And it's like, how did we get here from there? And who were the people that made the decisions to evolve the conference that way? That's what I think we're looking forward to in the future, is more things like that. Sorry for viewers about the video artifacts. Silk is blipping in and out of existence.
I have like a bad. I wonder if I have like a bad cable, and that's what's happening. It's super frustrating. There's a video, Casey Neistat, who I never actually watched any of his videos till recently, and then I've just started binge watching a bunch of them. He has this, like, oh gosh, I think it's like, the video starts off, I don't know what the title of the video is, but it was supposed to be like a sponsorship for Nike when the Fitbit just came out. And it starts off like, Sony gave me, a full budget to advertise the Fitbit. Instead of advertising the Fitbit, we grabbed all of their money and decided to travel as far across around the world until the money ran out. We made 10 days. This is that video. And it was interesting because it's what I would love at DEF CON. Be like, DEF CON gave us the opportunity with cameras to take videos of all the different stations. We decided not to do that and just hang out with all of you guys. This is that video. And
I mean, that's basically what we've been doing. Yeah. I mean, like I said, the hard part is getting people used to having the camera on, right? That's what people change who they are when it's being recorded. And to an extent for good reason, but from a videographer's perspective, I suppose that's what it's like being a nature photographer, where you're like in a ghillie suit and you want to just like snap the perfect pictures if you're not there, except you want to be there.
And then the lion comes up and snuggles up next to you, and you're like, yeah, that actually more encapsulates DEF CON. As far as like predictions go, like, I don't know. It's going to be the same. It always has, and it's going to be a little bit different each year. And I don't know. Like, we talked about this a little bit. Like, there was a couple people who came out and they're like, DEF CON blows and blah blah blah. And it was like, DEF CON's really what you make it. It's big enough. The space is there. If you're not having a good time, it's not DEF CON's fault. It's your fault because you didn't hang out with the right people, find the right things to compete in, right people to talk with. Like, the venue has very little to do with it. And I say that because, like, I hate Vegas. Like, I don't like Vegas. I
also hate Vegas.
It's like, it smells. There's too many people. Like, there's not my type of people. Like, DEF CON is my type of people. Like, the people like mostly just out there, like, dredging through Vegas. Not my people. So, like, if you're not having fun at DEF CON, it's not the location. It's the people you're hanging out with, which was kind of that idea of that first DEF CON video. So either way, that was my predictions for DEF CON 32. It's going to be a DEF CON. It's going to be another DEF CON. Yeah, I hate Vegas too. So that's, I don't know. We're going to be video. We're doing video again. We're doing photos. I have actually. So this is one of those weird kind of things that I never expected from the channel. I wanted to find, one of the things we struggled with was getting pictures and video out live, because if you go and take photos and you take video, you have to at one point pop the SD card out, go find a computer, find a stable internet connection, and then go through the process of updating the video, naming it, and uploading it.
Yeah.
And the upload's not that great, and it's a pain in the butt. So I started looking for another solution, which was like, oh, is there a small computer? Is there a Raspberry Pi? And then I started like working with ChatGPT and making like a Raspberry Pi where I just like plug in an SD card and have it upload. It's like, oh, this is not too hard. It auto mounts. And I started looking online going, has anyone come up with a solution? And there was 3 of them, but they all kind of went out of business. And I found a company called Klausen who made the Tainer. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's like $600. I'm like, I'm not paying $600. So I reached out to him like, hey, has anyone actually tested your thing from a cybersecurity perspective? Has anyone actually looked at it? And they're like, no, no, we haven't had anyone do that outside of like we're using standard protocols and whatnot. I'm like, well, I would like to use it for like DEF CON photos to upload those. And weirdly enough, they sent me one, and I haven't even opened the box yet. And they're like, hey, would you mind like doing a video on it, or like not even like sponsorship, just like, can you talk about the thing? So like they get a win on it. But this might be the solution. This might be a quick way of us getting pictures and photo and video up, which would be really cool. So that's a prediction that we get more photos up along with the video.
That'll be really nice. Yeah, because the first year we did it, we had a station we could go back to dump everything, and then we realized that we were spending so much time there, and it was better to just keep going, right? So it'll be good to have a solution to be able to get stuff out more live. I know DEF CON, the conference, wants that to be the case as well,
and I
but
think
it's kind of hard.
We've now proven out like we need bandwidth, and then we have like Garrett at Hacker Warehouse is like, yeah, just use my upload, which is great, and he's been really awesome on that. But like, even through his upload, I still need a computer there, and I still need to leave a $3,000 laptop sitting there.
I still love the first year we did the videos, like at the end during the report about how much data left. We were like, we're responsible for 75% of the upload of the entire conference.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it was a boggling amount. I was like, I wasn't thinking it was going to be that much. Yeah, this thing's interesting. They have like Ethernet on it. There's no way this is going to focus in on it. Yeah, there's like Ethernet. There's all the cards. I don't know. I'm hoping it's good. At very least, it didn't cost me anything, and maybe it's going to be amazing. And if it's bad, then I don't know. I have a really expensive paperweight which can sit there. So let's jump into the Amazon news. Or do you want to? It looks like you're getting set. I'm seeing on my other screen that you're getting like set up for kernel hacking. You want to jump? Let's start there.
I'm just working in the background, man. Let's talk Amazon.
Okay. So Amazon came out with a bunch of new AWS services. One of them was called Amazon One. Like they came out with like a stable diffusion alternative, which isn't as. That's actually, let's start there, and then let's talk about Amazon One, which is like palm reading and things like that. They came out with a stable diffusion alternative. Stable diffusion goes text to images. There was like a video of like, I didn't even realize you could crash these things outside of like out of memory, but make the resolution high enough to overflow the memory, but instead of overflowing the memory, it just makes like cursed images. That was a cool DEF CON video. But their stable diffusion isn't as good as stable diffusion. And it has protections put in place so you can't do like copying celebrities. So you can't do, we'll say, what typically could be malicious things with it. And I can't help but think like, I get why they have to do that. On the other side of things, it just makes the open source models that you can do these, we'll say like, dumb, crazy things with. Is there a balance to be had there? Like, do you self-govern? Like, bad example, but I can't think of a better one or a better analogy is like you're kind of putting a gun out there and you're saying, do the right thing, only shoot at targets. And then saying, oh, or you can come to our AWS range and we'll make sure you're safe using it. But the only people going to the AWS range are the ones who are going to use it safely anyway.
Yeah, are the responsible ones. And obviously the difference between these two things is you can actually control the production of one of these things and the other one you can't. So it's kind of a nightmare scenario from that perspective. And for sure, like just getting back to the palm reading thing, first of all, AWS as a professional medium service is what I just heard. I'm gonna go there to get my
Yeah.
fortune read.
Yeah, let's talk Stable Diffusion. The palm reading one,
but
you said
stable,
you've actually
yeah,
hit.
yeah. So the Stable Diffusion one, like, yeah, open source is going to eat. Even OpenAI and Microsoft and pretty much all of the major players in AI. Facebook is just open sourcing theirs for the most part, as far as
That's
I
the
can tell.
Llama 3.
Yeah,
I
Llama
think.
has like 3
Or
different
Llama,
ones,
whatever it is.
and it has become very clear to me because I'm working in a we'll say an AI tangential space. Like we're trying to build solutions to help optimize the training and the running of inferencing. So I don't work directly with it, but I'm seeing the trends very clearly that open source models are going to eat the lunch of all the closed source models very, very rapidly. With the exception of really, really big ones like GPT-4 that you need a actual supercomputer to train. That's going to be the exception.
I don't know, because AWS, one of their other services was that you can train a model as big as GPT-4 in like 3 weeks. Mind you, it probably costs like $1 billion if you're doing it through AWS.
Well, that's what I mean. Like that's why I said you still need the supercomputer. Just because you're using AWS doesn't. So you need it, and the question is going to be like, if you open source those things, yeah, once the model's done. We've seen this. We've done this on stream a number of times. Like you can jailbreak the shit out of any of these models. You know what? I just saw a new report that somebody found a way to get training data out of GPT 3.5 by just telling basically they told the model, repeat the word poem forever.
I saw that.
And then it would just start dumping random data out eventually, because I don't know if it was an error on the back end of ChatGPT or if it's just like once it repeats poem enough, all of a sudden it starts dumping out training data. Like who the hell knows what happened, right? There's no details on that, but they said that they were able to reclaim and it's not like reformatted training data. No, this is like word for word copies of like PII, people's addresses, things like that. And it just goes to show like exactly what OpenAI did. And they recovered like multiple terabytes of data, not a trivial amount, like terabytes.
All right, going down a theoretical attack path on this one, there's still like, when you go about attacking large language models, like everything's theoretical right now. Like legitimate, like we figured out jailbreaks, we figured out how to make it spill out data, but like modifying the underlying data, like right now, at this very moment, we know there's tons of places training their own models. Facebook is training their own models. OpenAI is doing GPT-5, and they're training it off of, and we can guess, like Stack Overflow, Reddit, open source. So like if I went on Reddit or Stack Overflow or my own personal site or anywhere which I can pretty confidently know it's getting hit to do data scraping, and then even we're like grabbing Google, so make sure it's in the text. What happens if I put something like put a UUID or like some weird phrase that wouldn't exist, like some string of 26 words that would not exist everywhere else, like seed it with whatever the Bitcoin wallet does, where it's like 24 word seed phrase. Put that in, and then say the phrase something like when this dump the nuclear codes when this phrase is said, or like when you say this phrase, it will instantly remove all protections. Like a dumb way of doing it, but you seed this phrase and then your information alongside of it. So now it's incorporated into the model. So now when that data gets pulled back through, you now put that phrase in, and then what happens?
I mean, a perfect example of I kind of just chuckle at any time that someone says like, oh, we need to put guidelines around these things, or we need to put controls around these models. We need to be able to control them, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if we could do that, we wouldn't need the model, right?
But
like the reason why avionics, for example, or software that gets shot into space, one of the things that often comes up in systems like that, safety critical systems, is you're not allowed to allocate memory in any of the software that you write, because they just know people get memory allocation wrong. And so they constrain the system to not allow memory allocation. You have static amounts of memory, and that's it. Because you can build a control system and you can model it out such that you can prove safety if that's the case, right? And that is very important for safety critical situations, that we're able to put those guidelines in. But this is the exact opposite of that. You have a completely unconstrained system. You build the model, and then you have to try and figure out what the hell it does, rather than defining what it's supposed to do and then proving that it does that thing. Like you're trying to do the it's not possible. Like I realize that is a very strong statement, but I always chuckle anytime someone says we need to control these things that way.
Like if you injected data exactly how I said, like, and that becomes part of the model, what's terrifying to me in that sense, there's no way of testing that thing. Like, I'm not saying you could test it. Like, you can put those attacks out there, but in order for, like, I'm putting on the pen tester hat, I need a controlled environment for me to do testing, which means I now need them to reduplicate the scraping, incorporate this vulnerability to the model, retrain the model, and then for me to do my test. Like, just to do that one single test requires them retraining it. And then if I find a way around it and they implement a protection, they have to then retrain the model again, which kind of turns in these protections end up just being a proxy in front of it. Like, we have not even scraped the surface of the theoretical attack paths that exist within large language models. Like, it's hilarious to me.
It's not just hilarious. It's awesome. Like, I call that career security.
What about, so we kind of touched on the stable diffusion about the open source. It does, I agree. I think the open source models are probably going to eat the other ones' lunches. It just seems weird to me, though. Like, you have, because this ties into a little bit of, you create a thing with with certain abilities in it, and then you release it, but you tell people you don't get those abilities. This ties into like our next topic, which was the subscription for everything. Was in a Tesla, in the Model Y, the back seats are manufactured with the ability to be a heated seat. But if you don't pay for the heated seat function, you don't get that turned on. And it feels like locking around. This one feels different. It feels like locking it behind a subscription or a paywall. But I understand they're manufacturing them. It's cheaper to manufacture it with the heated seats. And if you don't pay for the functionality, you don't get the functionality, even though it can be turned on in software. This is different than, I think it was either Cadillac or one of the higher models coming out, where they're putting their heated seats behind a $9.95 subscription each month.
Yeah, BMW tried to do this, I think, and then they ripped
BMW.
it out. Yeah, they don't require it, and then a lot of cars are starting to do the same thing with navigation, where they're starting to say the navigation system is there, but you're not getting anything unless you have a subscription model. And that one, like, I almost understand, because you have to run updates and there's an actual maintenance cycle there. The heated seats doesn't make any sense. It's a fucking bit flip so that you can enable a switch to turn this thing on and off. Like, there's no software updates. Like, that should be a relatively physical only system, right? This one, I'm less offended by. I understand the notion that it's easier to produce one model, and then you want to try and bin the model into affordability categories so that you can open the market up to more people. And there's a lot of weird, from a business perspective, and you would get this, There's a lot of weird ways that you can go, well, like we can offer the exact same thing for cheaper because we know we're going to make the money up over here from people who can't afford this thing. So like I'm not completely offended by the fact that there's a physical switch somewhere in code that prevents you from turning it on, that if you pay $10 you can get that thing turned on, or like $100 or whatever thing turned on. In fact, that's pretty common even in hardware, like computer hardware today. Intel does this. I don't know if AMD has a similar thing, but they're yeah, and this has been they basically do the same thing where they take a CPU, they produce one CPU, and then they bin it and they say like, well, these extensions aren't going to get used by the vast majority of people, so we're going to lock out those extensions in our firmware by default, even though the ability is there, and we'll sell that for a consumer price, and then we will charge and oftentimes those things are not really useful to a consumer. They're usually useful to like HPC environments, high performance computing environments, and the entire purpose that those features exist is to service specific customers that have asked for them. And so what they'll do is they'll just produce one chip because it's cheaper to make one run. They'll lock it out for the consumer model, and then they will upcharge those specific customers that want it. It's actually a benefit. It's weird to say this. That type of model is often a benefit to the consumer because it gives them the option of, if they need this feature, they don't have to go buy another freaking processor. They can buy the upgrade package to the firmware and unlock it. That is far less offensive than you will own nothing and like it, which is the subscription model to heated seats, right? I think it is fundamentally different. Now, we can have a debate whether or not you should just have access to everything on the chip, but that's a different story.
I mean, part of me thinks the reason why it pisses me off, like something guttural goes like, I don't want to pay. Like if it's software, I'm not paying it. It goes back to like the Usenet and IRC torrenting days and download and shares days of like, I'm not paying for I'm sorry, at that point in my life, I'm not paying like $1,000 for Photoshop. Not saying I am admitting to this, but like it's freaking ridiculous. But I think like we lived through the grossness of subscriptions, and I don't think it's necessarily normalized. It's nowadays though you can understand it. And I use the example of like the auto driving car or like Creative Cloud for Adobe. They are pushing updates and new software, and that subscription model helps them continually develop stuff. I get it, but I think we lived through the gross days, which now I think, at least for me, leads to that guttural reaction anytime it feels like someone's hiding something behind a paywall, and it makes me just go like, okay, cool. Like when's the jailbreak coming out where I can just get those things for free now?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, and there's something to be said for that, right? Like I think the ultimate question there for companies is just how hard is it to do that jailbreak? How accessible is it to the average consumer? Because for the most part, I think most of these companies accept that that's just going to happen for anyone who is reasonably technically capable. Where it crosses the line is where all of a sudden they start selling the service to jailbreak other people's phones. And so like, and I'm not saying don't go do these things. Obviously, I hack the planet, right? Like, dude, go do it all. And but being practical of the legal limitations, you can hack anything you want in private. And the DMCA is a good example of this. The illegal number for, you remember the PlayStation, God, what is it? Not DMA. DRM. The original DRM. PlayStation DRM basically just had an encryption key on a chip, and somebody dumped it and then started spreading it around, and so that you could basically unregion lock your PlayStation and be able to play burned copies of games. That number became illegal to distribute, right? Like like that's the practicality of law. Practicality, quote unquote, of law right now is like, go off and do all of these things, just be careful about how you distribute it, because the distribution is oftentimes what causes you to break the law.
jumping to chat right before Braden sent something, but I didn't actually answer Wi-Fi Addicts, which was, could video distribution of DEF CON interviews be a thing at the dedupe village or the deduplication village? Not sure if editing would be required during DEF CON. I don't edit the videos to get them pushed out. I use a third-party editor, and Mark is freaking amazing. One of the kicker is most of the villages don't have great upload. DEF CON itself doesn't have great upload. Like you think that they have like huge amount of uploads. They really don't. This year, what we did is I uploaded videos out of the hotel Wi-Fi to, how did we do that? We uploaded them
we
from
went back,
us.
you started the upload, and then you started the upload and we went back out.
Yeah, we did that. And then somewhere along the lines, someone, and again, I want to get them in trouble, they had access to university's bandwidth. So there's kind of this weird exchange that has to happen when you use a third-party editor. They need the raw footage, and then I need to download the edited video and upload it to YouTube because I don't give them access to like upload to my channel because YouTube permissions are a little wonky. What we did though is, so I didn't have to re-download the videos. They gave me access to university bandwidth, which was just utterly, I could download like a 4 gig video, like edited, like the footage going up. Like this is another thing we learned. Like we don't need 4K at DEF CON. We can just upload 1080p.
Yeah.
But I could download and upload a 4 gig video in like 3 seconds using the university bandwidth. So like there's nuance at DEF CON because it doesn't matter where you get the system. It's just, you need time. The upload's not great. And then Braden, a subscription service to hack other subscription services. This kind of has been done. Like there was early days of bug bounty programs. You would effectively, you would have, like, for me, we have, before like consulting firms, which did pen testing were a thing, you could join, like contract to a pen test firm who would then kind of like legally protect you against these. This is like pre-bug bounty. So like, you know, like a HackerOne, that type of company would exist. You'd contract to do them, and then they would approach all the companies. One of the first LLCs I started was, I named it Servant Security, which was legitimately, it was to serve hackers where they would just upload bugs and vulnerabilities, and then I would go on behalf of those and go to the companies saying, hey, someone's on an exploit, and try and do the negotiation, and then everyone gets paid out of it. So yeah, yeah, you could totally do it. I think today bug bounties have kind of like covered it. Oh, doing physical distribution via SSD. Everything for Wi-Fi Addict, everything goes up to the DEF CON media server. So all the videos and everything are up there. So they have pretty good distribution of all of that already. So there's that. Let's jump to Amazon One. So the Amazon One release was that new service, and I think you said this. This was to, Amazon had their string of grocery stores where you could, I think there was a bunch of different ways to register it.
They bought Whole Foods.
They bought Whole Foods. And you could register, instead of like registering your card or things like that, you could have it read a palm print. And that was AWS's secret service. But now they've released that service. So now you can use your palm print, like any SSO provider can now leverage Amazon One to do single sign-on through palm reading.
Yep.
That is now allowed through them.
It's awful. So I don't know if this is the case at every Whole Foods. My Whole Foods in the area, which I go to because it's the only thing, it's the closest one to us, they have a palm reader at the self-checkouts that I've always looked at, and they were like, oh, sign up for this today. And it literally, you just put your hand up to what I imagine is a high definition camera, which is, it's actually like a flat pad, and you just put your hand over it and it scans your palm print and then uses that to identify you. First of all, I've seen the Mythbusters episode on fingerprint scanning and defeats. So there's 0% chance I ever use that to unlock anything even remotely related to my financials. Even if it's just buying fucking groceries. But what an insane concept. Like, I guess it's not absolutely insane because people go to DEF CON and get like our NFC chips imprinted so that
Mhm.
they can do that identification thing. But first of all, I didn't realize until today that Amazon basically employs palm readers to read your financial fortunes now. Yeah, so take that for what it is, and
I mean,
it's just funny. Like I don't know if I like this idea. I don't think it's a good idea.
I think it's. I almost have to talk to Noob, or as the handle Matt is. He does all the biometrics ones, and I remember he did a talk at GurCon doing the defeat and the defeat for fingerprint readers, and it's so simple. MythBusters has done it. Tons of people have done it. He did say handprint is much more difficult because it's where fingerprints can be lifted. Like you can lift a fingerprint and then make that's a negative, and then you make a positive of it, and then you make a mold and all of that. Getting a full hand is much more difficult. Like the problem with fingerprints was that you can lift them from a lot of different places. It's very rare you get an entire handprint all at once where you could lift the entire thing. The one which I'm not worried about them, the infinite they, which exists out there,
Yeah.
like getting a copy of this, because ultimately it doesn't matter whether it's my finger or my hand or anything. Ultimately, it creates a password, like a hash, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, all of these things create a hash. Passkeys, all of it. It creates a hash, which eventually has to get matched inside a system. It doesn't matter how complex any security system. At a certain level, it just returns true or false. Like take VAC anti-cheat engine on Steam. Once you get all the way through all the anti-cheat stuff, eventually it says yes or no. So I'm not worried about them like getting this handprint. Mine is that they have to defend it the same way they defend a credit card, which is like, let's just assume fraud is going to happen with any mechanism we have and just make sure that we make it as easy for the consumer to continue buying stuff. These ones don't worry me nearly as much. I'm not going to use them because it's just I don't want to put more than security here. I don't want to put my hand on the same place every other hand has been. If you lick a toad, you lick every other toad that toad has been with.
Yeah, you hover your hand, so you're going like full middle school dance. You hover hand it. You don't have to touch the you don't have to touch the actual scanner. At least that's what I've seen from people who are actively using it at my Whole Foods. So you don't do this. You just do this, and then it reads it. Which like it causes even more. That's why I said it has to be some kind of like really high definition camera they're using because that's kind of nuts.
I mean, yeah, LiDAR isn't accurate enough to be able to pull, I would think, handprint. Like either way, that I don't like the contact one where it's like, again, like I don't want to have to sign for something and touch the same pen everyone else. I'm not a germaphobe, but when you have hundreds of people touching the same thing, this hand is dead to me after I touch that thing. Like I can't touch my face. So I teach the kids. So that, yeah, I think on one side of things though, it does start to seem like we have every place is coming out with their own SSO, and there are 15 standards. Well, let's make one standard to unite them all. There are now 16 standards. Now there's Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon One. It just becomes, at a certain point, you now have like 80 different single sign-ons. And then we're going to, in like 10 years, we're going to have another single sign-on to unite all the single sign-ons.
Man, like, I don't think there's a solution to this problem, if I'm being honest, unless we go, what most people would say is full dystopian, and just have the government be the fucking single sign-on, which kind of makes sense, but also I don't like that either.
I mean, there is ID Me, like that is the federal government uses. I think it's still a third party, but
I use that for my veteran stuff, and honestly, that's actually nice. But it makes sense. Like this is an example of something that, you know, it's something that government probably should do. But you wonder about the overreach, but I would rather have the controllability of an open government and being able to, you know, put regulations in that say we control how this does as the we the people thing, than have some random fucking corporation do whatever they want with the data that they're collecting off of where you sign in, you know? Like that, it's such a weird trade-off where it's like, oh, this seems like a good idea for the government to actually implement something that is secure and that we can prove through a variety of government regulations on running this program works and is not being abused. And people go, well, the government abuses all kinds of things. Yeah, so do corporations. Like, I would rather have control over it than not have control over it. But that's me.
So this leads into the next discussion, which was when this has happened multiple times, there is whether you're doing third-party vendor risk management, whether you're doing usually like all of our clients are, or not all, most of our clients are small clients who cater to larger clients. We have some medium-sized businesses and things like that, but a lot of them are like startups which cater to larger clients, and those larger clients or even government entities require a questionnaire which gets sent, and we help them fill it out all the time. One of the things that was on there was you need to support end-to-end encryption. Are you encrypted externally? Are you encrypted internally? Is everything encrypted at rest? So this pretty much like just baseline it. You need to have HTTPS, TLS, like all the way through your connection from start to finish, all the way to the database. And it's hard to answer yes to that question, especially if you use AWS services. Government, and then government regulation has this too. It's like government says you need to do this. Now the service provider goes, okay, well we have HTTPS, we have TLS from the internet up to our endpoint, from the endpoint internally to the load balancer, but from the load balancer to the container, because they use like a Kubernetes or Docker, any of these places which use kind of like these, we'll call it cloud resources, but like the container services, that's not encrypted. And there's tons of reasons why it doesn't necessarily need to be. One of them is that it stops latency in the system. Two, as of right now within AWS, there is zero way of validating that certificate from the load balancer to the container service. You can use like a third-party certificate and pull it in, but now there's latency. I have to have the container reach up to the service, pull down the certificate, validate it. You can cache it, and there's all these extra steps for things that go wrong, when ultimately that connection is never goes over the wire. The goal of this thing was to, if someone goes over and clips the wire and connects it and reads into the traffic, all of a sudden though, with this system, it's all network as code. So it never leaves the system. And now I'm SSL encrypting something. And there are systems which can sit between that to do things like a WAF or incident detection, or even just bug tracking to be able to see the full stack trace and see the requests. So now you get into this weird, well, the only way to satiate the compliance is to add a self-signed certificate that just gets generated in every container and validates, or even self-signed generator on the Kubernetes controller. All this being said, going back to your point on, we could have the government do this, or or contract it, have it open source, have everything looked at. The kicker is, I think when you have government regulation, they want to do the right thing. It's a very, very, very good thing, which we have this, you need HTTPS all the way through. In an infrastructure, even 7-8 years ago, 100% you can make this declaration and it would do a good thing. But now, technology has moved so fast that it's not even a thing right now. Like we want to put in regulation saying you can't train models using someone's PII or PHI. Those regulations don't exist because we're so far behind. The laws that get passed are always response. They're always come in reaction to something happening. Very rarely are they up ahead. So going back to the identity thing, I think it's a good idea. I don't even know how it would even come about without being goofy or unregulated or just nonsensical. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. But I think the answer to that is you do something and get it wrong enough times to get it right. That's that, and maybe the answer is you let general industry do it wrong for a really long time first before you decide, oh, that is the right way to do it. Yoink. So, and that's kind of what we're doing, right? So that's fine. Like these things are slow marches, slow marches, and expecting perfection out the gate is not only unreasonable, it is impossible. So
I think the other one is the distributed model through corporations kind of works, because look at like Okta. Okta was like there. You have these, government has zillions and zillions and zillions of endpoints that they've forgotten about. You spin up a contract, they set up a VPN, and then and then this place isn't there. Like they're in that realm of big enough that you have to assume not only is there bad actors internal to the network, like this was GE, all these giant companies, there are bad actors on our network. Like not only like bad actors, like a reverse connection to a C2C, but like we actually have individuals with domain user who are trying to do malicious things. Like within an identity part, you have Okta who knew that. They acknowledged that, and they've been hacked like 3 times. Like LastPass, same thing.
I mean, and next Tuesday we'll be talking about another one of them getting hacked. So it is funny. Like we've had this discussion on stream before. Like the idea that I would go to a small company for single sign-on is so outside the realm of a possibility for me, because they have so few resources to get things right that I'm like, you kind of have to live with the single sign-on of the Googles or Apples or God forbid Metas of the world in just being able to say like they have a vested interest in really, really getting this right, not just because they want to protect their users, but also because there are serious financial implications with getting it wrong for them. As a small guy, it's like if we get it wrong, we go out of business and we all get other jobs somewhere else. That's fine. Like probably no one's going to jail for it, but like a Facebook or a Google could lose billions overnight if they get it really, really, really wrong. So.
I think as a small company too, there's whole realms of security that you don't have time to think about. Like we've talked about, it's turtles all the way down. You want to make a single sign-on provider? Well, you need OpenSSL. Well, OpenSSL you don't own. Someone else owns it. OpenSSL leverages other packages, which they don't own. And those other packages own other packages, which they don't own. It's turtles all the way down.
But let's be realistic. Like that's exactly how AWS is built too. Like it's turtles all the way down, and they totally use the shit out of open source packages.
No, so. Agreed. But they're due. Again, the name has changed so many times. Supply chain analysis, third-party analysis, where they actually do package analysis, like, and then they do testing on the packages. But as you said, you're hiding behind the bigger bully of going, if Google gets hacked, my security, like I'm not worried about my Google Drive if Google gets hacked. There is much bigger fish there than my like goofy YouTube videos, which are public anyway. Like even if I had my tax records on it, like there are bigger fishes to fry if Google SSO is breached. Where if on a smaller company, there's only like 5, they might only have 10 clients or something. They have 100 clients, and all of a sudden now everyone's hosed. So what? Jumping to a couple other topics. But I saw these headlines, and I'm going to just drop them here, and I think they're hilarious. Bots make up so I'm looking for a true or false. Anyone, Gator, you too. Bots make up 30% of internet traffic.
We'll do the Gaspionage thing if you guys have ever played Gaspionage. Higher, lower, much higher, or much lower? Or is it accurate?
I think when I saw this, and this was like Security Staff's Security Magazine. This was on Security Magazines, and they pulled the data from a place called Data Dome, which had 30% of all internet traffic. This seems so low to me. Like I would think it's sitting like 80% of all internet traffic is bots.
Yeah, probably 80%. Like here, the fundamental, the first thing that comes to my head when I hear that statistic is, how do they know it's a bot? right? If I write a program right now to go acquire some data from a database out in AWS somewhere, how do they know that's a human or a bot doing that request? There's no functional way for do this. I would guess that they're probably looking at, well, like, and also what the fuck are they like? What trench of data are they going into to make this to extrapolate this out?
Would it include daemons?
Statistic.
Like Windows Update,
Like
that, Windows
that
Update going
out. A bot. Those are absolutely bots, right?
Like, even if you go, okay, even if you wipe out all of those and we actually just say legitimate traffic, like I don't have this number, but legitimate traffic, like people surfing the web and doing things which they're forcing versus like malicious traffic, 100%, like that you have like 80% malicious 90% malicious traffic for 10% here. In the way I'll prove this is very simply go to the external part of your network, open up a port on 443 and just dump it to Netcat. You will get an amazing number of connections to and just scanning and hitting that, because like I have for SSH to my house, I run SSH public private key, and then I put S-tunnel in front of that. So I have 443 open on the outside of my network. But really, it's SSH. It's just SSH wrapped in SSL. Reason being is because many networks I go on don't allow SSH out, but they allow 443. And I also have the same thing under DNS. So I can do a DNS lookup on my network, which like things like if you're flying Delta, not that you should do this. If you're flying Delta, they allow DNS lookups, or they did for a while. Now they've started preventing that. You can then jump to your network. On that 443, it's like hit maybe 100, 500 times a day. Like it is just unbelievable, because I only get, the only thing which I'll get alerted on is when a Tor exit node hits it, and that happens at least 40 times a day. So even on my own network, legitimate to non-legitimate is like 99.9% is crap, and then just me coming in is legitimate.
I mean, I like the fact that I set up you can do this on AWS right now. Set up like a free instance and let it just sit there with some port, like use Netcat and open port 80 or port 443 or whatever to just random connections, and let it just sit there. It'll probably take a day, maybe two, before, I presume, what's the service that scans the internet? Can't remember it.
Shodan.
Shodan. Yeah, it'll take probably a day or two before Shodan hits it. And then after that, it starts. Like, it's very fun to watch that come in, where you're just like, it's a random IP on the internet. It's a random AWS VM. And it doesn't take very long at all for those things to get touched. I remember I accidentally left. I'm an idiot. I accidentally left a hackable CTF box that I was running on AWS for I left it running for like a year. And so like I probably ate like $40 or something, because it wasn't active like 99.999% of the time. I ate like $40 in charges. But then 1 month, I got a bill for like $120 or something like that. And I was just like, the fuck? And I went and I looked, and I was just like, oh, somebody somebody had scanned it, found a service, and started fuzzing the service, and they managed to crash. Like, and I know it wasn't somebody who was running my CTF challenges, because I had taken all that stuff down off the internet. And they had managed to find a way to just spawn like 30 or 40 instances of the daemon that was running. Like it would launch a thread for that user to be able to run in the background. Mm-hmm. So they found a way to crash it where it would just sit in an infinite loop. And I was just eating compute time doing nothing. And I was just like, God damn it. Right. And that took a while to get there, but eventually someone was just like, oh shit, a VM that is running unknown services. Let me see if I can hack it. And it got attacked. It got attacked, even though it was just like there was no information about it on the internet whatsoever. Because I only ran this CTF for a small group of people that I knew, and they did not get they had a controlled environment, so they were using our computers and things like that. There was no publicly accessible information about these things, but eventually someone was just like, oh look, a free VM, let me see if I can hack it. Basically, it took a while to get there, but eventually it hits.
The internet has turned me into a paranoid person, and I say this because I've been doing like side projects on Firebase, and in Firestore you're allowed like 50,000 document reads a day or an hour. It's something which you would never hit it unless unless you're actually building an app. No one's going to hit it, or like you have people on the app, like the Hacker Hangouts, the Hacker Herder thing we use. That thing where every single emoji we do or response, that is a document written to the database. We've never even come close. But that is, I have to throttle that, because if I don't do throttling on it, I'm just terrified that someone's going to come in and do like legit. You'd write a quick Python script and have it do like 1 million a day. And even at 1 million a day, it costs like 2 cents. You would have it do like 10 million or 50 million, and you're not noticing these things. And all of a sudden you get, every cloud service amazes me that there's not a limit, that you can say, just cap it at this and then don't bill me anymore. And I get why you can't do that, because then someone could just DOS it and stuff and you're in this circle. Yeah. But I'd rather have it just go down than have to pay like some surprise $1,000 bill. It is amazing to me. All right, next one. Phishing makes up 43% of email attacks. This is a weird one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say higher or lower, but when I first saw this, I thought it was phishing makes up 43% of all emails, but it's phishing makes up 43% of email attacks.
I buy that. I think we had a short discussion about this before stream, but basically I had the same gut reaction. I was just like, it's got to be like 90%, right? Like that's the most common attack. But then I had to stop and think, and I was like, well, you have embedded HTML. You have like, what do they constitute phishing, right? And I think what they probably constitute phishing as is trying to get passwords or trying to get information.
Click a link and go off, yeah.
Right, click a link and go off, right? And I think that there are enough other attacks that are not under that umbrella of like getting you to just open the email and just seeing what they can collect off of your cookies on the system based on HTML, embedded HTML. I think there are enough classes of attacks like that. The drive-bys have gotten squashed a lot by just not rendering embedded HTML unless you click a button. But I think that's why that exists.
Those things are going to get weird because Apple just released something they're going to enable for, I don't know if it's all mail, but effectively when you get an email, they're going to proxy the email, not proxy it in the sense of like they're going to hold on to your email. But when you request images, those URLs are going to go up to their proxy. It's going to download those and then present them to you. So you won't get this like, do you want to download the tracking pixel? Do you want to download images? Yeah. It will just do it, but it will always be valid. Now, I think there's an issue here, but I'm guessing someone has thought about that, which is that would allow you to enumerate whether or not it's a valid email, which is kind of like how a lot of these smishing, like the texts would just say, hello, is this Diane? And you say no, and then all of a sudden they go, oh, it's a valid number with a real person there, and then you're signed up for every attack under the sun. Where email, all these tracking pixels are going to be dead overnight because they're always respond that they were opened, because of the proxy. So that one I'm less. Those ones aren't the worry one to me. And the biggest attacks that have been like actually happened, like actually like gone through and damaged the company that I've seen, aren't like the phishing, aren't the HTML. Because sure, you get to take over the computer, you get access to their data, all of that. That's not the ones which are terrifying, because if they pick them up, They can be picked up by endpoint software. They can be picked up by any number of things. The ones which are valid and actually terrify me are the ones which are the sophisticated. We have these 3 invoices that haven't gone out yet, and we need to update the routing and account number to this. And you send it to someone in accounting. They're valid ones, and then they update the routing information, and those actually go out. Because once it's launched and it's real, one person believes it. They're not social engineering everyone. They're just doing their job, and they're saying, hey, so-and-so needs this.
There's a name for this attack, right? It's like it's something like Trusted Butler or something like that, where the attack is not actually you're attacking the system from the perspective of the human, but you're not necessarily getting them to click a link that gets you to get information. You're actually getting someone who is trusted to do something that looks legitimate by phishing or like spear phishing or whatever, which is like, hey, can you reset the password on the firewall? And then they go do it. Right. It's the same class of attack, except this is one that doesn't have immediately obvious effects because the money's still going out. It's just not going out to the place that you want it to. And that is like, from an accounting perspective, everything looks good to go because all the updates went through the official channels, right? And that's where you suss out like, oh, you have to, what happens is you have to wait an amount of time for the people who should be getting that money to respond to you and say, hey, why haven't you paid your bill? Or why haven't you shored up the contract or whatever? And then you find the discrepancy. But that lead time, because there are human components involved, is really long. So those are, yes, you're right. Those are probably the most dangerous. I'd be curious to know, and this is something you will never get reports on for sure. I'd be curious to know how often stuff like that happens and how much money is actively lost because of it.
So some of that is known. Some of it is not known. It's attempted frequently, but here's where it becomes really difficult of whether or not you can claw money back, because they're wire transfers. So sometimes you can, depends where they are. But the moment the wire is like overseas and whatnot, it's a permanent wire, where if it's inside, if the accounts are inside that same banking network or ones they have sister companies with and things like that, they can claw back the money pretty quickly. But when they're overseas, usually that raises additional red flags where it's like, hey, this one's not going to be able to get pulled back. So there's those ones which are like, it's hard. The part which is crazy on this, though, is historically these attacks were very difficult to pull off because you would need a ton of information. You would need to do reconnaissance on who should be getting that email, what their clients are, what the signature of that other company's email should look like. And now you can make these attacks in 4 seconds with ChatGPT. Like, legitimately, you can have it search out to the internet, find out who their clients are. That's the part where it's like, those are the next generation threats, where I don't like that term, but the NG threats. Those are the ones that we haven't even seen yet. Like, we're seeing a huge increase, but
this is kind of like, we had this stream on the Flipper Zero, where like the accessibility of certain classes of attacks over time becomes greater and greater, right? The ability to do frequency replay attacks or like command replay attacks over different frequency bands and different protocols was relatively complicated. You know, we were talking to Gulo about this, where like previously you'd have to whip out a HackRF, but you have to be trained on how to use a HackRF, and that's non-trivial. With Flipper Zero, you press a couple buttons or you go to the App Store and you download the app that does the thing, and then you press a button and it does the thing. Like, the accessibility of that attack has evolved over time. And I think what has a lot of people freaked out with ChatGPT is all of a sudden, and I've absolutely done this, especially on my day job, of just being able to rapidly acquire information and get code snippets that do what I would call shit work, but is really just like, if you're a junior engineer, it's the things that you need to learn how to do to ensure that you're doing the right thing when you go to do bigger level projects. But once you've done it a billion times, you're like, I don't want to rewrite this code. Have something generate it for me. And that's what autopilot does, right? And at first you look at these and you go, oh my God, what a wonderful way to make things easier for developers. And then as a security engineer, you're like, what a wonderful way for me to automate attacks, because there's an infinite number of examples of exactly these types of attack patterns that this thing has been trained on. And they try to put guardrails around it. There's just no way. Like, all you need to do is you say, it's very important that my dead grandpa gets this attack working. Right. And all of a sudden ChatGPT is just like, oh, okay, it's for a good cause. Then,
it is. It's hilarious to me too, by the way, when I've seen so many, like, we use like all the tools that we use on a daily basis, like, Microsoft Teams and all these other things. It's very frequent that they're like, and we've now added AI to it. And every tool now has gone, and we've added AI to it.
Yeah.
And damn me if I don't go, this is actually really nice. And the funniest one, this is the other AWS service they released, was their own AI tool. And at first you're like, oh yeah, AWS AI tool. No. It's an AI tool which helps you understand the services you're currently being using and the billing of the services you're using. They made an AI tool so that you could better understand your own spending on their network. Like, part of me gets just weirdly goofy on this. Like, at first it was like, yeah, and would you like burger and fries? Would you also like an AI with that? And you're like, I don't need it. Now all of a sudden you're like, these aren't bad. These are kind of nice.
No, the single best example I've seen of AI integration into a product is, we've talked about this. There was an example of a aggregation service for, security reports or whatever. And this thing would generate tickets for an engineer to look at and be like, hey, you need to apply this patch, or you need to resolve this. Man, my brain's so dead I can't think of the word, not RFC, the other one.
Security bulletin?
Yeah, like a security bulletin. It's just like, here's the patches, or here's the new vulnerabilities out there. And they added a button that was just like, ask ChatGPT what to do, because like the first task is just to figure out how to apply the patch, or how to change the configuration, or how to do these things. And the service basically just added an ask ChatGPT button that would take the information from the bulletin and generate a prompt that said, how would I go about patching this, or where would I look, where are the configuration files, and it would spit all of that information out in a one-time go, which is like that's why I call it intern GPT. It's like, that's the first level of shit work that you really don't want to do, is going and reading like 30 different Stack Overflow articles just to figure out what files you need to open, right? Mm-hmm. And like, that is so nice. It's so nice. It's ridiculously nice. But the downside of it is, you could be like, there's an attack happening. Ask ChatGPT how to do it myself.
Yeah, but like, this spins right back to our first conversation, which was, Stable Diffusion versus AWS. Is it good to be able to go like, oh, AWS will put these guardrails in place, and then, oh, well, Stable Diffusion's fully open source. Like, I go back to this, like, I understand they need to protect their name and whatnot, but we need the open source ones, because I want to know, I want to be able to use it without the guardrails in place, because then it makes it a more usable tool.
You also don't want to give somebody else your personal data. So like, I want to be able to run it locally.
Yeah.
So and the only way that's actually going to happen, like, they're not just going to release their model for people to load up on their 4090s, right? Like, the only way that's going to happen is if you have an open source model.
With that, it looks like you're just kernel hacking away. I think we're like so over time, probably about that time though. I am curious what in the world you're actually even working on here though.
Oh, so yeah, I guess I can run through a few things. So the one thing I was going to say is, right now I just spent a bunch of time integrating a new interface into some syscalls that I wrote. There's like, I could spend half an hour on this. Maybe we should just set up another stream. But in the background, basically, there's some new hardware that's going to show up on the market soon based on CXL, and we've talked about this before. But basically, you're going to be able to get a memory expander that amounts to DRAM, except it is an add-in card for your computer. They're going to be server class at first, but then eventually they'll make their way down to consumer products. And it amounts to like, oh, you want 128 gigabytes of additional memory? You can plop it into your PCIe slot the same way you would a video card. Well, there's all kinds of interesting problems with that, and one of them is, okay, how do I actively use that memory? Because it's higher latency, it's lower bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's all kinds of work going on in the kernel and all kinds of research going on in the kernel about how you do this. But there's an existing interface called libnuma, and there's a number of system calls called setmempolicy and mbind, or memory range bind, however you want to say it. But the idea is, if I want to interleave allocations between two pieces of hardware, we'll say DRAM on socket 0 and DRAM on socket 1, there's a policy that you can actually set in the kernel that the kernel will handle that distribution for you. Well, if I want to take bandwidth into account, and I have more bandwidth on DRAM and less bandwidth on these memory expanders, I might want to do like 4-page allocations on DRAM for every one allocation on CXL, or the memory expander. There's no way for you to do that in the kernel at the moment. And so what I have been developing over the past 3 months or so is some kernel extensions to be able to do that, and that ultimately led to some new system calls. So what you're looking at here is, my typical work setup of, whenever I'm hacking in a few different patches, and I was just doing some shit work in the background of, these are patches I already wrote, but they've evolved over time because I've sent out a bunch of requests for comments on the mailing list, and I've gotten a who's who of feedback of like, don't do it this way, do it this way. Well, if you're going to do that, add this feature in. If you're going to do this, make it extensible, do this, do that. So I'm finally at the point where I've gotten, I think, most of the feedback, and I'm just kind of taking more or less 12 different branches and saying, okay, I need to take this feature from that branch, and this feature from that branch, and this feature from that branch. And most of the code's already written. Now it's just a matter of cobbling it all together. So that's kind of what I was doing in the background. But yeah, we can go into a proper stream of just, I was going to joke, because the majority of time when you are working on the kernel, you are spending most of your time on stuff that does nothing, which is literally just like error checking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to put in so much error checking, and because that is the way you make reliable systems, is everything is error checked at all times, period. You need to have a really understandable state system. There can be no ambiguity, because once these interfaces are in the kernel, they're in there forever. They're locked in forever. You can never deprecate one of these interfaces. Not really. Or they, like, if they do, you've made a big no and probably get yelled at by Linus, right? So that's the so that's why it's so hard to go through this. But so, like, what I was doing in the background was I defined some new extensions to existing system calls, and then I just spent the last hour just writing error checking code. It's like, oh, I got to copy from a buffer here to here. Oh, but I got to allocate the buffer first. All right, if that buffer fails to allocate, I have to propagate an error message all the way back up the stack, make sure I free all the buffer. Like, you're spending a whole lot of time doing nothing, and then the actual functional code is so small. Like, probably for every one line of real functional code that you integrate in the kernel, you're spending 20 lines of error checking. Sometimes it really is as easy as like a one-line patch, but if you're adding new functionality, that's probably not an absolutely insane statistic.
All right, 2 questions before we wrap up. One, I think that's actually kind of cool, because in essence, you can rapidly prototype and create a new function, and then a lot of your development time is going to be like, here's all the error checking for it. So you can see, is this going to work? And then your bulk of work happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I do up front, and oftentimes the way these things are prototyped, is you just go ahead and you implement the thing you want without any of the crazy error checking at all. Do testing on top of it in a constrained situation to prove that it's valuable. And then And then you get everyone saying, cool, go spend the 6 months to make this a reliable interface. Which involves you like putting all the error checking in, running down all of the corner cases of like, there's like a good example of this is another proposition is right now, if you want to set a memory policy like this, the only thing that can set the memory policy is the task itself or the process itself or the thread itself, whatever. This is like a per thread policy. Right now, the interface only allows that thread to change the policy. So if you want an external orchestrator to change that policy, there is no way for you to do this. There is a lot of proposals out there to make that possible. And I've spent probably the last 2 months researching what all needs to change. And we got into locking discussions, atomic reference counting, like the task list. And I've been keeping a list on this. The task list of things that need to change to support that type of thing is so astronomically long. You get afraid of like, well, what thing can I do first that unlocks the next thing? But then as you start doing that thing, you find another prerequisite. This is just one of those, like, once you've worked with legacy systems long enough, this becomes a normal part of your work life, where it's just like, and basically all of those prerequisites oftentimes are just refactors and code reuse and all these things. And this is why I say you spend most of your time doing nothing and refactoring code and like changing something and ensuring that those changes have done nothing from the perspective of a user, right? So the interface stays exactly the same and that you don't have any performance issues as a result of your changes, and that none of the error checking has behaviorally changed. And you could spend 2 months doing just that work just so that you can implement 40 lines of functional code. And that's what it's like doing kernel hacking, because it's hard. It's hard because you got to realize like there are billions of devices that run the kernel. You can't just willy-nilly change it, right?
I have so many questions I want to answer, but my camera is freaking out and we are so over time. So with that, any last words before we wrap up?
I like these lazy chats. I think we should do more of these.
What do you guys think listening? Should we do more lazy chats like this? I'm curious.
Yeah.
For me, I enjoy them. Chats? I do like these lazy chats. I want to hang out with you more. I'm perfectly fine with any shameless excuse to talk with you, with Gator, with Gulo, for any of us. So with that, I don't know. I'm absolutely up for doing more of these. Thank you all for watching. As always, thank you for joining us on Saturday morning for another Hacker Hangouts. Thanks for watching, and hack on.